Hello and welcome to week 3, Gilded Age, and we're going to be talking a little bit about technology today within the Industrial Revolution. As discussed in the introduction, there's a lot of patents and innovations that happen during this time. There's an increase in manufacturing that happens during this time, and we're only going to be talking about three important ones. There's hundreds of important innovations that happen during this period, um, from so much of more of an electronic sewing machine to innovations of refrigeration that begins to happen during this time, as well as better railroad systems, rail systems, manufacturing of textiles, laundry machines, washing and dryer, primitive dishwasher even happens. There's a lot of things. Most of the innovations tend to be on larger factory scales, with you get the assembly line and other things of that notion. But we're going to be focusing on three that I think are very important that you probably haven't thought about, or you have to a certain extent. And those three are the incandescent light bulb, electricity, and the phonograph, also known as the gramophone. And these three are vitally important to many of the things we do today, um, particularly electricity, the incandescent light bulb, and to a lesser extent, but very vitally important, the phonograph. And I'm going to be talking about these probably not the same order. The how much civilization changes because of these three innovations is um, is numerous and incalculable. Electricity is so integral into our lives today that we don't think about how revolutionary it was, and also how controversial it was at its first innovations. Now, the harnessing of electricity goes back prior to Benjamin Franklin. Actually, his great experiment with the key and lightning had been done 6 months before in France, but we tend to glorify that in American history. But this understanding of having this electrical forces within lightning and other dates back hundreds, if not thousands of years of trying to understand that and how to harness it, in fact. With the harnessing of electricity into more applicable settings, we use this every day in so many ways, that many people cannot function today without it, and it would have seemed very strange that people couldn't function in their daily lives prior during this period. It was a luxury that becomes a necessity, and I'm going to use that term a lot, but this is really how innovation works. It becomes something that only rare amount of people, or only certain people, usually the extremely wealthy, are able to have, and then through um, the process of not only innovation but also in manufacturing, it reduces the price, or becomes so necessary that people can't live without, can't think of any alternative. Cars are a great example of that too. But I'm going to be talking about electricity, incandescent light bulbs, and the phonophone, or gramophone, as it was called. So with electricity, again, people have been trying to harness it for a long time. Uh, but really, the debate centers around of what type of electricity is going to be used, and that is it going to be an alternating current, or a direct current? So AC versus DC electricity. I'm not going to go into this very much about the differences, and there's quite a bit, but alternating currents are currents that periodically switch direction. This is, for example, like a light switch. You can turn it on, turn it off, and it will switch the direction of travel. Direct currents are need a connection from one end to the other. Alternating currents do connect, but needs a unbroken connection from one way to another. Example of this is a battery. If you put a battery into something, it forms a loop that is a direct loop, and it doesn't change the direction of electricity's travel. Now, this seems pretty straightforward, and there's a lot of debate behind this, but really what it comes down to is between Nikola Tesla, whose life dates are 1856 to 1943, and the Westinghouse Electric Company, and Thomas Alva Edison, and the Edison General Electric Company. And this caused debate wars, and in fact, it's called the electricity wars that happened in the between 1885 and 1886 between Westinghouse and Thomas Edison. Now, Nikola Tesla is the person that kind of patents the idea of alternating currents. There were other people as well, but he kind of has the manufacturing of an alternating current circuit. And what was standard at the time with early electricity is having direct currents. So you would have a direct line of houses, or of a direct line of electricity that is going from one hub to the other, and you would have to make sure that it was an unbroken line. And if something broke along that line, like say a house goes out with electricity, then all of them break down at the same time. Now, to do this, you have to have stations throughout a specific point at one station or another. Edison had patented that direct currents. And since he had patented, his entire company was based around the fact that you would have a direct line with the power stations at a certain point. So you'd have a lot of them linking. Um, he had patented and was a big proponent of it. And he kind of starts the war against Tesla and Westinghouse by pointing out that with alternating currents, that within the first 6 months that at least 6 people will die. And he goes around and he starts showing that what the problem with alternating currents is, it has too much power, and it's going to kill people. And so what ends up happening is wars that start around where people travel to different fairs and different science conventions and stuff, and they're showing the power of electricity. So much so that stray dogs are electrocuted. They also have people that come up that get like shocked and whatnot. One of the most extreme is the electrocution of an elephant, which we still have the video of. You can search it on YouTube. And it is showing like the power of electricity. And Edison really goes after Westinghouse and Tesla as kind of the bringers of death, and they're seen as the bringers of death. They go around electrocuting these things to show people that this is too much power to be harnessed. It kind of drives Tesla a little loopy, as well as Westinghouse, and they're like, look, this is a superior form. We're going to have less power outages. We're going to have less surges by using alternating currents. Today we use primarily alternating currents for all of our electricity in our houses and stuff, and we tend to use more direct currents when it deals with batteries. With the exception of cars, that's very complicated. So they have these wars that go around, and people are frightened of alternating currents. And there are proponents in both camps who are alternating or versus direct currents. And it's a really vicious battle that ends up happening between 1885 and 1886, and ends up with Edison initially winning, but eventually turns over to using alternating current after he buys the patent. Um, and it takes Edison a long time to get around this. And part of the reasons is that with lampposts, all of the lampposts along certain streets, Edison also had a patent on lampposts and light bulbs that worked through these direct currents versus the alternating currents with the incandescent light bulb. And so he was trying to use this a little bit. What ends up happening as a result is that Edison and Edison General Electric Company ends up having a merger due to J.P. Morgan, who is the infamous robber baron, who I'll talk about in the robber baron sections. And in 1892, he orchestrates Edison's buyout at Thomson Houston's Electric Company, which ends up forming a new company, which is General Electric, which then therefore owned 3/4 of all power and electric companies in the United States versus Westinghouse. Well, Westinghouse eventually won in the fact that they have alternating currents, are still used today. Um, However, General Electric is still around and still producing things, and this is due to Edison and the buyout that happens, which creates a large monopoly, which is General Electric. Now, the incandescent light bulb is vitally important, and to kind of understand that is you have to understand how lighting worked prior to the incandescent light bulb. So, prior to the incandescent light bulb, everyone used lamps or candles. Now, first candles are made of beeswax and other forms of wax, and that can be very hazardous because when you have houses, ultimately someone's going to knock over a candle and start a fire, which does happen. And fires were really a big fear among most of the population. After, with candle uses, eventually they began using lamps, and lamps were uh, done, largely done from blubber from whales initially. And so you get a well, you melt down the blubber, that oil from that blubber ends up doing lamp lighting for a long time. It's a very terrible process, and it's pretty brutal how that entire process works. Anyway, wells, blubber, oil. After that, you get to have this notion of oil. And when they first start finding oil, they realize, oh, wait, there's two different kinds. There's this kind of top, and then you can boil it down and get more crude. And there's a process of manufacturing. But prior to that, the top is pretty much kerosene. So kerosene lamps become become very standard use. The also problem with kerosene is that kerosene lamps, they tip over, they start on fire, etc. Also, you have to worry about gases that are produced, and if unventilated houses, which largely a lot of tenement houses and stuff weren't as ventilated as it needed to be, you would also have increasing deaths from carbon monoxide. So eventually, if people began trying to invent the incandescent light bulb all the way back from the 1870s, um, we are going to be talking about two people who one person invents, one person kind of changes a little bit and then patents it. Um, and they are not considered the only two. If you look at historians, they believe that at least 22 other people prior to these two people I'm going to talk about have probably invented the light bulb. The incandescent light bulb becomes invented between the 1870s and 1880s, and this is by Joseph Swan and Thomas Edison. And so Thomas Edison comes up with Joseph Swan. What he does is he does the filament that allows the incandescent light bulb to work. Now, incandescent light bulbs are a bulb that has a filament that has gas within this to work. It revolutionizes the world, the incandescent light bulb, just like electricity. You have to have electricity to allow the incandescent light bulb to truly work. The incandescent light bulb changes how humans um, uh, work beyond just normal hours. Yes, you have candles and kerosenes and lights um, and lanterns that worked before, but largely people would stop at a certain point. Like it was okay, the sun would go down. You might have a little bit of time after that, but then things usually stopped. The light bulb changes that, and it changes it primarily with machines, because with machines you couldn't really do a lot with candles and lanterns because things um, would catch on fire more honestly, and it was difficult to see, and it was hard lighting, and yes, there were people that would work all the way through, but the light bulb changes everything. I'd like to note though, before the light bulb, you have gas lanterns as well, and a lot of gas lanterns were piped through. Again, low ventilation, a lot of people died of carbon monoxide, you have to worry about explosions, etc. But with the light bulb, it changes humans' behavior. In fact, humans' behavior is sleep as well. The phrase "sleeping like a baby." Well, that used to be babies used to sleep through the night all the way through. They actually have done studies recently, light studies showing that because of our use of lighting, that babies tend to wake up more. having night lights and blue lights and etc., that we tend to wake up more as infants because we are distracted by the light instead of the natural lighting system. But moreover than besides babies not sleeping is also you have manufacturing where people can work 24-hour shifts. You can have non-stop manufacturing, and this is essential for the Industrial Revolution with gas lights and then the incandescent light bulb. And you have 24-hour cycles of people working, people who only work primarily during the night. And this allows manufacturers to continually produce and produce and produce. It also changes. At first, it's just put in wealthier people homes, and then it becomes essential life where people need light. They like working at night. And this really has changed our whole biological cycle a lot since the introduction of the incandescent light bulb. So that's one of the reasons it's vitally important. The last one we're going to look at about is the phonograph or gramophone. The phonograph is in 1887, becomes invented, and it's renamed the gramophone when it's patented by Thomas Alva and Edison. And this is really important because for the first time sound is captured. And sound is captured at first. They use wax rings, which uh, it that they can melt though when it gets really hot. But they end up finding that we can harness sound and put it in a physical presence. And so if it's played, if it's rolled on these wax cylinders, little you would have like a needle that would go over that and record that. And they found that with these different bumps and stuff, you can have the sound that is recreated. And it's also the speed of the movement of the needle, the cranking that happens, and the gramophone, the phonophone, and the gramophone is really, you have to crank it to make this work. So if you ever had a little music player that has like metal on it and it tings, that's the same. Or if you ever seen a player piano, that's the same. But this is really important because for the first time you hit sound, and not only that you get the phonograph where you have sound that is dictated onto these cylinders or music that is dictated onto the cylinders, then you get the dictaphone, which allows people to speak, and that is immediately recorded. Now this changes not only um, the world in general, because for the first time you get recordings of speeches, you get recordings of music, but it changes the world in many real ways. It changes the music business entirely, because prior to 1887, you had traveling musical troupes that would go around, and people were famous. You had famous opera singers. That's all they would do is travel around performing the same opera. And how they performed it was very characterized to how they did. With the advent of the phonophone, the phonograph, people began to have certain ways. They heard that that musician did it a certain way, so they wanted that repeated. And so live performances were never as good at the time because it wasn't the same as what you were hearing. Um, it also made it so that everyone would know someone in the country. So it would be, oh, well, that is the singer, that is the lead soprano that we need to hear. And so it kind of ruins amateur musicians in many ways. But at the same time, it records performings that we can still hear today. And some of the recordings you have throughout are going to be performances that were done during the time, not just recreations. Um, it also allows people to hear speeches that were given at the same time and not only record it, but have it in their household that they could hear these speeches. This is really prevalent with presidential candidates as well as women's rights movement within the women's rights, the suffrages. Um, end up uh, getting on board with this and making sure that they could have traveling lectures for the first time. And also on that, it helps you learn languages, which was very important. You could record how to say your language and then and send it around the world so people could learn from audio recordings how to speak a different language, which really changes dialects. So dialects used to be far more diverse, and then after with recording music, you tend to have more homogenized sounds. Um, the joke that all newscasters sound like they have this non-accent is kind of how this happens. You have these things that are recorded, and they become so homogenized that it kind of um, replaces originality and authenticity in many ways. Um, the phonograph was seen as controversial for the time, and famously, Queen Victoria refused to speak on a phonograph. They For fear that her voice was going to be stolen. You have this real fear of the phonograph as well as the light bulb. There's always a fear with new innovations that is going to not only change the way of life, but it is going to change the way of life in a negative way, or it's going to hurt an individual person. And that was what was seen with the phonograph. So I hope you enjoyed the overview of 3 technologies that have changed our lives to this day, which is electricity, the incandescent light bulb, and the phonograph.